Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
They didn't even have the guts to look me in the eye when they pulled the trigger. That's the part that stuck with me, even more than the cold HR lingo or the fact that I'd seen this coming like a freight train with its horn blaring. It was 11:30 on a Tuesday when the calendar invite hit. Touch base, 11:45, HR conference room 2. No subject line, no prep. Just one of those, if you know, kinds of meetings. I knew. Hell, I'd known for weeks. Still, I showed up in a clean shirt and with a travel mug of lukewarm coffee, because if they were going to push me out, I was going to walk out like a man, not some flustered middle manager clutching his stress ball and begging for a second chance. Karen Mathers, Director of Human Resources, sat at the head of the table like a wax museum version of a real human. She had that way of speaking like she was reading off a legal transcript instead of actually saying words. To her left sat Mike Trent, my manager, 10 years younger than me, all teeth and hair gel, the kind of guy who calls himself a thought leader on LinkedIn and probably rehearses his TED Talk in the mirror every night. Mike couldn't even fake concern. He stared at a folder in front of him like he hoped it would open and swallow him whole. Karen cleared her throat, adjusted her glasses purely for effect. I'm convinced, and launched into it. So, we've decided to let you go, she said, and even though I was braced for it, the words still punched a little deeper than I expected. She followed up with some jargon about alignment with company values and team cohesion, and then the kicker, recent behavior that raised concerns around leadership trust and internal collaboration. I sat there, still as stone, while Mike avoided my eyes like I was radioactive. Because we all knew what this was really about. 2 weeks ago, I flagged a compliance issue in the new product, something big enough to draw regulatory heat if it went live. I sent the details up the chain, like any responsible compliance lead would. And Mike? He told me to let it go. Don't slow us down, he'd said, like I was some cranky hall monitor nitpicking typos, not the guy who's paid to keep us from getting slapped with federal violations. And when I didn't back down, he made his move. Started shutting me out of meetings, reassigning my reports, dropping vague remarks in team chats like, we're pivoting away from legacy approaches. Now here we were, HR doing the dirty work while Mike played the coward. I thought about arguing, thought about laying it all out, but I'd been around long enough to know the rules of this game. Once HR's in the room, it's not a negotiation, it's an execution. So I smiled, slow and steady, and leaned back in the chair. Appreciate the clarity, I said, even though what I meant was, you spineless bastards just made the worst mistake of your lives. Karen slid a severance packet across the table, but I didn't even pick it up. You're welcome to review this with legal counsel, she said, like I was some litigious psycho about to unleash hell. And maybe I was. But not the way she thought. Mike finally spoke, his voice low and flat. This isn't personal, it's just, he started, but I cut him off with a look. The kind of look that says, don't you dare insult both of us by pretending you believe that. I stood up, straightened my cuffs, and looked him dead in the eye for the first and last time that day. Tell the team I said good luck, I said. Then I walked out. No scene, no yelling. Just calm, collected dignity, the kind that makes people nervous. Here's the thing they didn't realize. I wasn't just some grumpy lifer they could toss overboard. I was the guy who'd kept that ship afloat more times than I could count. The guy who'd worked weekends fixing other people's screw-ups. The guy who actually gave a damn about whether we stayed out of trouble with the feds. And now I was walking away with a front row seat to the slow, silent implosion they just set in motion. Because that compliance issue I flagged? Still unresolved. Still baked into the product code. Still heading straight for a wall at full speed. And now the only person who had raised the alarm, the only person who might have saved them from themselves, had just been shown the door. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like this, and smiled while doing it? Back in my car, I sat for a long time before starting the engine. My hands were steady. My jaw, not clenched. No tears. Just a tight, simmering clarity. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to warn them again. I wasn't even going to break anything. That's not my style. But I did have a thumb drive in my glove box. And on that drive was every email, every Slack message, every damn document that proved I had tried, really tried, to do the right thing. It wasn't blackmail. It wasn't revenge. It was insurance. And it was already on its way to a place where people actually care about things like consumer data and federal regulations. So yeah, they fired me for questioning leadership. But I walked out clean, quiet, calm. and from a safe distance. I started watching. Because sometimes the best kind of revenge is just watching idiots dig their own grave, while you sip coffee on the porch and wait for the sound of the collapse. It started with a knock on my office door that wasn't really a knock, more of a hesitant tap-tap like the person on the other side wasn't sure if I'd bite their head off or thank them for interrupting. Benji stood there, 20-something, messy hair, nervous energy, and the sort of kid who still believed in doing things by the book, which made him both refreshing and, unfortunately, doomed in a place like ours. He shifted awkwardly in the doorway, clutching a laptop to his chest like it was some kind of shield. "Hey, can I run something by you?" he asked, and I nodded, motioning for him to come in. I'd always liked Benji. Smart kid, too smart for how junior they kept him, and way too earnest for the political games this place required. He set the laptop down on my desk and pulled up a piece of code, back-end integration logic for the new customer data sync system in the product we were prepping for a major release. "I don't want to sound paranoid," he started, eyes darting, "but this doesn't look right. It's pulling personally identifiable data from multiple systems and dumping it into a shared cache without encryption. No audit trail. No user consent confirmation." I leaned in and stared at the lines on the screen, and my stomach dropped. Not because I didn't believe him. I did, but because I recognized what I was looking at immediately. It wasn't just sloppy. It wasn't just risky. It was illegal. Federal consumer data protection laws, the kind with teeth, the kind that get companies dragged in front of Congress, required end-to-end encryption, clear consent, and strict access controls when handling this kind of information. And this was a data breach waiting to happen, built into the foundation like a cracked pipe under a brand new house. "You did the right thing bringing this to me," I told him, which earned me a relieved half-smile. But behind that smile, I saw what he was really feeling: fear. He knew what kind of place this was, and so did I. After he left, I spent the next 4 hours digging through the development logs, version history, design specs, and email threads until I had enough material to send a very clear and direct summary up the chain. No emotion, just facts, screenshots, references to regulation, language like urgent non-compliance issue and regulatory exposure risk. I sent it to Susan, the senior compliance officer, and CC'd Mike and 2 other execs who loved pretending they were looped in. Susan replied 3 hours later with a short note. "Thanks, we're reviewing." That was it. No call, no meeting, no panic. I waited. The next day passed. Then another. Nothing. So I stopped by Susan's office. Her door was closed. I knocked. She opened it a crack and said, "I'm in back-to-backs today," without even making eye contact. The next day, I was taken off the QA alignment meeting I'd led for 6 years. The calendar invite just vanished. Then I got uninvited from the weekly product stand-up. No explanation. My direct reports started forwarding me messages like, "Per Mike, please route this to Ryan for sign-off." Ryan. Of course it was Ryan. Young, hungry, charming in that forced, performative way. Mike loved Ryan. Said he brought fresh energy. Ryan had never built a single compliance system in his life, but he smiled a lot and talked fast and never asked questions that made people uncomfortable. And now, Ryan was taking over my responsibilities, with no formal announcement, no transition, just a slow, subtle erasure of everything I'd built. Meetings where I used to sit at the center of the table? Suddenly I was at the end, if I was invited at all. Presentations I'd created were being delivered by other people. Slack channels that used to ping all day went silent. It was like someone flipped a switch and I was no longer part of the room. And Susan? She didn't just ignore the issue, she made it clear she was looking the other way on purpose. One afternoon, I caught her walking out of a meeting with Mike, and when I approached her to follow up, she said, "Look, we're moving fast right now. We can't chase every technical detail." Then she smiled, the way someone smiles when they're trying to convince themselves that what they're doing isn't cowardice, but pragmatism. That was the moment it really sank in. This wasn't a case of bureaucratic slowness or crossed wires. They knew. They all knew. And they were betting that ignoring it would cost less than fixing it. Or at least, less than delaying the launch. They didn't see a compliance crisis. They saw a speed bump. And I was the guy making noise about it. So I did what anyone with a shred of self-respect and a long memory does in these situations. I started building a paper trail. Every Slack thread, every email, every timestamp. I backed them all up to a personal drive, encrypted, of course. I printed out the original specs. I saved screenshots of code commits with my comments highlighting the violations. I even took notes after every weird conversation, every brush-off, every time someone called me rigid or overly cautious, like that was a personality flaw instead of a job requirement. Because I knew what was coming. I wasn't going to be thanked. I wasn't going to be rewarded. I was going to be pushed out, framed as difficult, told I wasn't aligned with the company's vision, all because I had the gall to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't violate federal law just to hit a shipping deadline. But I wasn't going to go quietly, and I wasn't going to go blind. The only thing worse than being betrayed is being caught unprepared. And I was done being surprised by these people. They thought I was too old school, too slow, too careful. But they forgot something. Old school knows how to survive. Old school knows how to cover his ass. Old school knows where the bodies are buried because we helped dig the holes. And I was just getting started. The funny thing about being slowly pushed out of a company you helped hold together for more than a decade is that it doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a smile. A slow, tight-lipped, PR-polished smile from your boss when he says something like, let's circle back to that idea later, which really means we're never talking about that again. And by the way, you're on your way out. You just haven't caught up to it yet. I'd been through enough reorgs, layoffs, and office coups to know what was coming, and sure enough, within a week of raising the compliance red flag, I started getting invites to coaching conversations and development feedback sessions. That all smelled like they'd been drafted by HR's legal team. Mike, ever the showman, started performing his concern for my fit in a company that had suddenly, and very conveniently, decided it was evolving its leadership expectations. He sat me down one afternoon with Ryan, the new golden boy who was somehow both junior to me and suddenly in charge of half my responsibilities, and said, we want to make sure you're not just contributing, but thriving. And the way he said thriving made it sound like a threat wrapped in a Hallmark card. They started recording everything. Not literally, but close. Every meeting had a follow-up summary. Every summary included lines like, tone came across as resistant or wasn't fully aligned with team direction. Never mind that the direction they were referring to was a compliance dumpster fire aimed directly at a federal lawsuit. Resistance, in this place, meant asking questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. And in a culture built on pretending everything's fine, being the only adult in the room makes you look like the enemy. That's when Lisa Harper stepped in, quietly, professionally, without a trace of drama. Lisa worked in finance, 2 floors up and 3 departments away, but we'd always gotten along. She had a reputation for being sharp, discreet, and most importantly, not full of crap. We crossed paths in the break room one afternoon, and she asked how things were going, and not in that corporate way, but in that real human way where you know the person actually wants to hear the answer. So I told her carefully, without specifics, but enough for her to raise an eyebrow. She waited until the room was empty, then leaned in slightly and said, they're building a case on you. I didn't ask how she knew. She wouldn't have said it if she wasn't sure. Lisa wasn't the type to stir up trouble unless she saw it coming straight at you with its headlights on. They're pulling budget data, she said. HR flagged your department in a few expense reports. That's usually how it starts, soft justification for why your role needs restructuring. Then she added, almost like an afterthought, I'd start saving your emails if I were you. I thanked her, and I meant it. Because now I had confirmation of what I'd already suspected. The quiet erasure wasn't just some spontaneous shift in team dynamics. It was deliberate, tactical, controlled. Mike was trying to frame me as a blocker, a problem, a dinosaur who couldn't evolve with the new direction. Never mind that I was the one who actually knew what the hell I was doing. So I doubled down. I started showing up early, staying late, smiling through every patronizing feedback session. I nodded when Ryan explained things I'd built from scratch 5 years earlier. I agreed with strategy decks that were more buzzwords than substance. Out loud, I was a team player. But behind the scenes, I was a one-man documentary crew capturing every shred of evidence that showed just how rotten the walls were beneath the fresh coat of paint. I had emails with timestamps showing the exact moment I raised the compliance issue and who ignored it. I had screenshots of Slack conversations where Susan told me it wasn't a priority. I had calendar invites mysteriously canceled. Notes from meetings that never made it into the official minutes. I created a timeline, documented conversations, and kept it all on a secure encrypted drive. It was tedious, it was paranoid, and it was absolutely necessary. And when I felt the heat turning up, when Ryan started asking my team to route reports to him directly and Mike began forwarding vague complaints about my tone in meetings, I made one more move. I filed an anonymous complaint with the FTC, outlining exactly what was happening in that product code and how leadership had knowingly buried it to make a Q4 deadline. I included documentation. I used burner credentials. I didn't expect fireworks. I just wanted a record, a trigger, something real on file in case I got blindsided and needed more than just my word to prove I wasn't crazy. Because here's what they never understand. The people who push the quiet ones out think we'll just disappear. They think if they do it slowly enough, we'll lose our edge, lose our clarity, maybe even start believing their narrative. But what they forget is that quiet doesn't mean weak. It means calculating. And by the time they realize they've cornered someone who knows every inch of the building, it's already too late. They thought they were quietly pushing me out, erasing me like a typo in an annual report. What they didn't realize, not yet anyway, was that I'd already lit the fuse and walked calmly away. Because I wasn't the kind of guy who exploded. I was the kind who left proof. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The last thing I did before I turned in my badge was leave the envelope. No words, no note, no melodrama, just a clean manila folder slid beneath the door of a compliance lawyer I'd met once at a conference and trusted more than anyone still drawing a paycheck from that building. Inside was a copy of the same file I had already submitted through the anonymous tip line, screenshots, emails, timestamps, code annotations, and a full summary that connected the dots in a way even the laziest regulator couldn't ignore. It wasn't vengeance. It was insurance. A fire alarm pulled on my way out of the burning building. They offered me a neat little NDA package that morning, all wrapped up with words like mutual separation and transition support. It came with a mid-five-figure check and the promise of a clean reference, provided I never spoke about my concerns again. I smiled, turned the pages slowly like I was considering it, then set it back down like it smelled bad and walked away with nothing but a box of personal items and the dry, satisfying click of a door closing behind me. For a while, I didn't do anything but breathe. I slept past 7 for the first time in years. I went for long walks without checking my phone. I ate breakfast while it was still hot. And then, 3 weeks to the day after my departure, I was drinking coffee on a rented porch in North Carolina when the first headline hit my inbox. The new product, the very same one I had flagged for its deeply illegal data handling practices, had failed its final compliance certification. The write-up was brutal. Anonymous sources within the certification agency said there were systemic and repeated violations that suggested a culture of non-compliance at the executive level. I sat back in the chair and read that phrase again, once slowly, like I was savoring the taste of something expensive and rare. A culture of non-compliance. They couldn't have nailed it better if I'd written it myself. By noon that day, 3 more stories had appeared, each with new angles. Investors had begun pulling out. The planned quarterly earnings call was postponed. And then came the kicker, a leak, from someone inside the company, complete with internal documentation showing that leadership had been warned about the issue weeks before launch and had chosen to proceed anyway. I wasn't named, not in the documents, not in the press. But anyone who had been in that building during the final month knew where the breadcrumb trail started. The screenshots included Slack exchanges I'd participated in, email headers with my name, meeting notes that tied dates to discussions that should have raised alarms but didn't. It was all there, just anonymized enough to protect me legally but obvious enough to make it clear that someone with deep knowledge, and the receipts to match, had finally spoken up. The press turned quickly. Not just tech blogs, but national outlets. One article labeled it a glaring failure of corporate ethics, while another ran the headline, "Was compliance ignored to please shareholders?" And then, the first real voice from the inside broke through. Nina Vasquez, a mid-level investment rep who had been quietly raising red flags to her firm for months, gave a public statement that exploded across business networks. This was not an accident, she said on camera. This was not an oversight. Leadership was informed, and leadership chose to move forward, eyes open. Her words were measured, calm, devastating. You could almost see the fear ripple through the C-suite. Nina wasn't just venting. She was preparing the ground for lawsuits, divestments, and resignations. By the end of the week, CEO Thomas Greer held a press conference that felt like watching a mannequin try to cry. He spoke in polished platitudes about commitment to improvement and internal review processes, but the damage was already done. You can't hide behind buzzwords when the market smells blood. Mike was nowhere to be found. The company announced he was on sabbatical, which, in corporate speak, means he's either gone for good or about to be sacrificed to the wolves to buy the board some breathing room. Ryan deleted his LinkedIn profile entirely, which told me everything I needed to know about how deep the stink had settled into that office. Meanwhile, I was still sitting on that porch. Same mug of coffee, same Carolina breeze, same quiet satisfaction humming in my chest like a distant drumbeat. I didn't throw the match. I just pointed out the gas leak and stepped away before the first spark. What people forget about whistleblowers, the real kind, not the ones chasing book deals, is that we don't usually want the spotlight. We want the truth to matter. We want the people who play fast and loose with integrity to understand that someone's always watching, even when it feels like no one is listening. And most of the time, that someone isn't the loudest guy in the room. It's the one who kept his head down, took notes, and waited. I hadn't gone back to work yet. I hadn't even updated my resume. There was something delicious about watching the fallout from the outside, untethered, unburdened, invisible. The company hadn't collapsed, not yet, but it was wobbling hard, and the cracks were spreading fast. Internal confidence was shot. Clients were reconsidering contracts. And the audit committee? They weren't asking questions anymore. They were issuing subpoenas. That's the part they always forget. When you treat the people doing the right thing like they're disposable, you better make damn sure they don't leave with the blueprints. Because once someone like me walks out with the map, all it takes is a single spark at the right time. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for their house of cards to feel the first gust of real wind. And I wasn't even done yet. It's a strange kind of silence that settles over your life when the fire has finished burning and you're standing in the middle of the ashes, unsure whether you're supposed to mourn or celebrate what's been reduced to smoke. Months had passed since the hammer came down, since the headline shifted from speculation to confirmation, since the company finally acknowledged, without ever really saying it, that I'd been right all along. And yet, even with the validation stacked in cold, hard facts and court filings, there was no sense of triumph that followed. Just a dull kind of ache where certainty should have been. The company's stock had tanked after the compliance failure made national news, with 2 major investors pulling out in the span of 10 days and a third freezing future contributions until governance structures are reevaluated, which is rich speak for. We don't trust any of you to keep the lights on. Layoffs rolled out in waves, first the contractors, then the mid-level managers, then the support staff, until the floor I used to walk every morning was gutted of everyone who'd ever mattered. Susan, the one who looked me dead in the face and told me we can't chase every technical detail, was subpoenaed as part of the federal inquiry and spent several days giving testimony in a suit that would end up costing the company a settlement larger than their Q3 revenue. Mike, last I heard, had quietly resigned. No goodbye message, no farewell party, not even a LinkedIn update. Just vanished, like a ghost in a $900 blazer. And Ryan? No one even pretended he was still around. He was an experiment that failed spectacularly, and the cleanup crew didn't bother leaving a nameplate. The product launch, the one they all scrambled to defend, the one I said wasn't ready, had been delayed by nearly a year after failing compliance certification twice and being labeled materially flawed by an independent audit. There were murmurs now of a full rebuild, which is a nice way of saying they were trying to quietly bury the thing without admitting it was ever born. And the FTC? They hit them with a multi-million-dollar fine, alongside an official statement about organizational negligence, which is as close as a government body gets to saying you really screwed the pooch on this one. The company tried to spin it as a learning moment, posted a blog full of hollow phrases about transparency and trust, and then immediately took it down when the comments section turned into a war zone. I got a call from Lisa one evening, not long after the final round of layoffs, and for the first time in all this mess, she didn't sound like she was bracing for something. She thanked me, straight out, no qualifiers. Told me I'd saved more than a few decent people from getting scapegoated, and that if I hadn't documented what I did, they'd have pinned the whole failure on the rank and file while the executives slid away untouched. I thanked her too, not because I needed it, but because I meant it. She was one of the only ones who had treated me like a human being during the unraveling, and those kinds of people are rare enough to count on one hand. But after I hung up, I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the old coffee pot that hadn't seen an early morning in weeks, and the pride I thought I'd feel didn't quite land. I had done the right thing, the legally right, the morally right, the professionally responsible thing, and yet it had cost me everything I'd built over more than a decade. I lost my job, my routine, my place in the world. The structure that kept my mornings tight, and my days purposeful had vanished. I wasn't grieving the job exactly. I was grieving the sense of being useful. My dad came by a few days later. Retired mechanic, hands like worn leather, never cared much for suits or office buildings or the kind of people who speak in quarterly projections. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, drank a beer without saying much, and then, as if he'd been sitting on the words all day, said, "Sometimes the truth costs more than a lie, but it lasts longer." He said it like a man who'd learned that lesson the hard way, probably more than once, and I realized that I wasn't the first guy to get burned for standing up when everyone else stayed seated. I nodded, and we didn't speak much after that, but the silence felt less heavy than usual. The thing I keep turning over in my head, though, isn't whether I was right. I know I was. The issue wasn't a difference of opinion. It was black and white law, ethics, obligation. No, the thing that keeps me up some nights is wondering whether I crossed the line from righteous to vindictive somewhere along the way. Whether I started enjoying the unraveling just a little too much. Watching Mike's career fall apart. Watching the company twist itself into knots trying to spin away blame. Watching the product crash and burn after they cut me out. There's a part of me, a part I'm not proud of, that smiled a little when I saw those headlines. Not out of spite, but out of relief. Relief that I hadn't imagined it all. That the gaslighting hadn't worked. That someone finally said out loud, this was wrong, and someone paid attention. But I also know that part of me liked the crash. Liked the way the truth didn't just crawl out, it blew the doors off the place. And maybe that part of me needed to win. Not just survive, but win. So yeah, I've got my proof. My dignity. My sleep. And the quiet knowledge that, in the end, the truth came out. But I also lost things I can't put a price on. Camaraderie. Structure. A job I used to care about. Did I go too far? Or did I just go far enough?